When the Caliph Omar reigned in Baghdad, there lived by the wells of Musa a certain camel-driver called Hasan al-Alfi, who had 7 sons, and the youngest was named Hasan the Little, or Hasan the Younger, to distinguish him from his father. The 6 elder sons went long journeys with their father across the desert, but the little Hasan went not, but remained at home with an old woman who had been his nurse, and he played in the garden by the fountains, and amused himself on the seashore, gathering shells, of which there were many of strange shapes and of most beautiful colours. One day when his father and brothers were absent, the old woman said to Hasan, "I must go away for 2 days to buy some clothes of which I am in need. Go not away to the seashore, but stay in the house and the garden, for it may happen that thy father and thy brothers may return in my absence, and if they come back and found no one to prepare them food, they would be greatly displeased." So Hasan promised the old woman he would remain in the garden till she returned. So she departed, taking a bottle of water to drink and some dates to eat on her journey, and Hasan sat down under the tall palm trees by the side of the large fountain to read in the Koran, for his father would not allow his sons to remain ignorant of the arts of reading and writing. When he had finished reading, he looked up, and to his great astonishment he saw an old man standing by the fountain, for he had heard no one come up to the garden. The old man had a long white beard that reached down to his girdle. His dress was a long linen tunic fastened with a leather belt, from which hung a small red earthen dish like a little shallow basin. He had in one hand a bottle made of the same sort of red earth, and in the other a long bamboo stick on which he leaned heavily, as if he had walked long in the desert and was weary. Now Hasan knew at once that he was a holy man who had been a pilgrimage to the tomb of the prophets, and he laid aside his book and rose up from under the trees where he had been sitting, and saluted the old man by bowing down with his face to the ground, and said, "My father, will you drink of the waters of Musa, and repose under the aged palm trees where our great ancestor Ishmael hath sat?" And the old man replied, "I will, my son." Then Hasan spread a mat under the tree, and fetched water from the well, and hastened and put dates and oranges and custard apples in a basket made of palm leaf, and strewed sweet-scented henna flowers over them. And when he had brought them to the pilgrim, he said, "Eat, my father, and leave a blessing on the house of Hasan al-Alfi, even the blessing of one who hath prayed at the tomb of the Prophet. Praised be Allah!" For so he had been taught by his father to welcome all holy men when they came to drink of the wells of the desert. So the old man ate and drank and lay down and slept under the cool shade of the palm trees, overcome by the fatigue of his long journey and by the heat of the day, for the sky was without a cloud and of the colour of burnished copper, and the fierce heat of the sun was like the heat of a great oven, and the long leaves of the palm trees moved not, for there was not a breath of air to stir them, and the sweet scented flowers drooped as if they were dying, and the bundles of hay ready for the camels when they came home were dry as the shavings of wood, and the sand of the desert that surrounded the gardens and the wells glistened and shone in the glare of that terrible noonday heat. Even the lizards clung to the mud walls, silent and sleepy, and did not run nimbly about and in and out of the cracks as if they were playing at hide and seek with one another, as is the wont of lizards to do. There was not a sound of man or beast, or bird or insect, wind or water, for the silence was complete. All things seemed burnt to brick and baked into hardness, and Hasan, as well as the old man, overpowered by the heat, slept till the sun began to go down in the west, and a breeze began to stir the branches of the trees, and the flowers revived in the pleasant coolness. Then Hasan awoke and looked to see if the pilgrim was sleeping, but lo, he was gone. But on the mat where he had slept were 2 leather bags tied with strings. Then Hasan got up with haste and ran round the garden and looked in the garden house built by the great fountain, but he could not find the old man. Then he climbed to the top of a tall tree from which he could see for miles into the desert, but he saw nothing but a great dust, which he knew must be caused by a troop of camels. And he rejoiced at the sight, and his heart was glad, for he thought it must be his father and brothers who were coming home. So he came down quickly and prepared the hay for the camels to eat and water for them to drink, and spread a mat for his father and got ready food for supper. And when all things were in a state of readiness, he remembered the bags that the old man had left, and opened one to see what was in it. And when he had looked into it, he was amazed, for it was full of pieces of gold. Then he opened the other, and behold, it was full of diamonds and rubies and emeralds. Then Hasan clapped his hands and danced round the bags with delight, and cried, "I will go to Baghdad, and live as doth the Weezer of the Caliph, and wear a robe of silk, and drink sherbet out of a golden cup." Then he took out some of the diamonds and rubies and emeralds, and admired greatly their beautiful colours, and held up the diamonds to the light to see how they glittered. And whilst he was searching amongst them, he saw there was a piece of paper with some words written thereon, and looking with attention, he perceived that it was addressed unto himself. For on the outside was written, in beautiful Arabic writing, "To Hasan the Little, the son of Hasan al-Alfi." Then he unrolled the paper, and then he saw that there was more writing inside. And he composed himself attentively to read, and the words were as follows: "The blessing of the old man, even the aged pilgrim from Mecca, who was wearied with journeying and fainting for lack of bread and of water, and who drank of the wells of Musa, and eat of the fresh dates of the garden, and slept safely under the palm trees in the hot noontide, rest on the house of Hasan al-Alfi, and a double blessing rest on the head of Hasan the Little, for he reverenced the aged man, even the aged pilgrim from Mecca, and made obeisance unto him, and tended him like a son. Now the old man, believing that the boy Hasan is one in whose heart dwelleth truth, leaveth in his care 2 leather bags filled with precious treasure, until he cometh again to claim them. And at the time appointed by Allah he will come again and ask of Hasan the Little to deliver up the gold and the gems. He also giveth to Hasan a ring that is sewed up in a small bag of silk of Damascus, which is concealed at the bottom of the bag of gold. Praised be Allah! Now when Hasan had read these words, he emptied the bag of gold onto the mat, and found at the bottom a small silken bag, such as the writing had described, and it was carefully sewed up. Then he took from his belt a knife and cut the stitches, and there appeared at the bottom of the bag a ring. Then Hasan took out the ring, and behold, it was but a ring of copper, and he threw it down on the ground and said, "It is but a ring of copper, such as the very water carriers of Cairo would not gather out of the dust." And when he looked at the gold and the precious stones, he despised the copper ring, and left it lying on the ground, and sat silent and sad. Now near him was a henna tree covered with white sweet-scented blossoms, and a bird of dull plumage that had no beauty came and perched upon the branches and began to sing. And it sang these words to the great astonishment of Hasan, as he sat with all the treasure of the sacks poured out around him, and the ring thrown down on the mat. "Look not upon the treasure, Hasan, hide it quickly from thy sight. Watch me as I float away far above these realms of night. Homeliest things are not the meanest, and the dull can change to bright. Watch me as I float away to the skies of pearly light." After that the bird with the dusky wings flew away, and as it flew far away, it seemed to Hasan no more a bird, but a peri with wings of golden azure. Then Hasan arose before the words of the wonderful creature had escaped his memory, and gathered all the gold and the precious stones, and put them into the bags, and tied them with the strings, and sat down on the mat. But he was sad, and sighed frequently, and said, "Of what use is all this treasure to an old man whose time on this earth will be short, and whose days are spent in pilgrimage to the holy places, and in ceaseless prayers to Allah, and that bread and water sufficeth for food? I will take the bags and hide them in the earth, and when some weeks have passed by, and my father and my brothers are about again to depart, I will secrete some of the treasure in my belt, and I will go with them, and when I reach some great city, I will leave my father and my brothers, and will sell the precious stones, and buy silk robes, and a palace like the palace of the Weezer, and no one will know, and when I want more money, I will return hither secretly, and take more of the treasure." And he rose and prepared to carry away the bags and hide them. But again he heard words come from the henna tree, and he stopped and beheld, and there sat a bird of the most brilliant plumage in the branches. Its wings glittered like the jewels in the turban of the Caliph, and Hasan was astonished at its great beauty, and it said, "Take the treasure, take it, Hasan. It will make thee rich and great. There is no one here to see thee. I will not the deed relate. Am I not of wondrous beauty? Wouldst thou like to share my fate? Take the treasure, seize it quickly, and for ever be my mate." Then Hasan began to dig a hole to bury the bags, and while he did so, he thought he heard a laugh of derision from the glittering creature, and he was afraid and trembled exceedingly, for he knew he was doing an evil deed in taking the treasure of the old man to be his own. Now it was the hour of sunset, and he remembered he had not washed. So he put down the bags and washed in the well, and spread his carpet, and knelt down to pray, with his face towards Mecca. And as he prayed, the bird changed its form, and became a loathsome creature, with wings like a bat, and long sharp claws on its feet, and round staring eyes that were like sparks of fire, that scorched Hasan as he looked at it, and its voice became like the voice of the cruel hyena of the desert, and Hasan was terrified beyond measure, and he said, "I will not take the treasure of the old man. I will only take the ring that he gave me, and the blessing he inscribed on the paper will rest on me, and on the house of my father." And he sought for the ring, and put it on the forefinger of his right hand. And when he did so, the ugly creature gave a loud scream, and flew away, and Hasan shuddered with exceeding fear. Then he took the bags into the garden house, and sat down to wait till his father and brothers should arrive, and his heart was at peace. And now outside the hedge of the garden he heard the loud voices of men, and the voices were not the voices of his brothers, but those of strangers, and their words were violent, and they uttered not the name of Allah, and Hasan was afraid, and he sat still on the mat and trembled. Then 6 men entered the garden, and took the hay and the water that Hasan had prepared for his father's camels, and gave them to their own camels. And when they had taken the loads off the beasts, they left them fastened to a palm tree outside the garden, and came themselves to the place where Hasan sat. Now they were fierce robbers from the desert, who feared not Allah, and had no pity on any living thing. When they saw Hasan, they said, "Oh, here is a slave who will procure us food and water, for doubtless he hath them by him. For is not this the house and garden of Hasan al-Alfi, the rich camel driver, whom we robbed on the way to Baghdad?" Then he who was the chief said to Hasan the Little, "Rise and bring us quickly some food and water, and spread mats under the trees, for we will rest and eat in this place, and afterwards thou shalt go with us, and be our slave and attend to the camels." Then poor Hasan the Little rose trembling, and went to fetch water and food, and he wept and said, Alas, alas, I shall see my father and my brothers no more, but must be a slave to the robbers of the desert." And he wrung his hands and wept bitterly. But the men had no pity on him, but said, "If thou makest not haste, O slave, we will beat thee as the carpets are beaten in the palace of the Caliph." Now one of the robbers went into the garden house to see if there he could find clothes or money to carry away. And as he was searching, he espied the 2 bags that Hasan had put on the divan, and he took them and carried them to the other robbers under the palm trees. And they said, "Oh, what have we here? What hath this boy hidden in these leather bags that are so carefully tied up?" And when they had opened them and saw the treasure, they rejoiced excessively and said, "This exceedeth all the treasure we have taken from the caravans this year." Then the Sheikh said, "Tie up the bags, and tomorrow when we rest at noon I will divide the gold and the precious stones, to each his right proportion, but the boy I will keep to be my slave." When Hasan heard these words, he fell on his face and entreated them not to carry him away, nor to take the bags, and he told them the whole story about the old man, and he showed them the writing to prove that he spoke words of truth. And they read the paper and saw that it was as he had said. Then they laughed and mocked at Hasan and said, "Let us look at this ring." And when they saw it, they laughed yet the louder, and the Sheikh said, "Thou mayest keep thy copper ring, for it is fit only for the finger of a slave. But we will have the bags, and I will keep the writing, for it may be a charm of great value, as is the writing of a dervish." And when Hasan entreated them to have pity on him, they beat him with a bamboo cane, put him into the garden house, and fastened the door. And he wept all night, and could not sleep, and continually lamented, and said, "Oh, my father, oh, my brothers." And as he sat weeping and lamenting, behold, the ring came off his finger, and it rolled along the floor, and as it rolled, it grew bigger and brighter, till it shone like molten iron, and grew yet larger and larger, and then it fell over, and Hasan was sitting in the centre of the great circle that it made, and it appeared like fire all around him, but it scorched him not. And outside the circle of fire he saw the vile creature that tempted him to take the bags, and also evil genii, and ugly crawling creatures, and loathsome animals that tried to get at him, but they could not because of the wonderful belt of flame that surrounded him. So after a time they fled away, and when they were gone, the ring shrunk again to its former size, and appeared but as a ring of copper. And Hasan took it up and put it on his finger, and said, "Doubtless this ring hath wonderful properties, and is a talisman of great value. Praised be Allah." And he rejoiced that the robbers had despised it, and that they had left it with him. And after that his heart was less sorrowful, and he slept and was refreshed. Now early in the morning the robbers unfastened the door of the garden house, and called to Hasan to come out and to load the camels. And when all was ready, they took the 2 bags of treasure and departed. The Sheikh rode on a fleet dromedary, and he made Hasan lead the camels that were laden with water, for they had filled all their water-skins with the sweet water from the wells of Musa, for they were going many days' journey into the desert, where they would find no water, nor grass nor herbs, save the bitter herbs of the wilderness that no man can eat. They took the way to the Red Sea, and at noon they stopped to shelter from the extreme heat of the sun under a great rock, and the camels lay down to rest. Then the Sheikh said, "Bring the sacks, and I will divide the gold and the precious stones." And Hasan was compelled to bring them, and they opened first the sack that contained the gold, and lo, instead of gold it was filled with sand. Then they opened the other that contained the diamonds and the emeralds and the rubies, and lo, they had been changed into little white and coloured pebbles, such as are on the seashore. Then the Sheikh said, "It is thou that hast done this. O Hasan the Little, thou shalt die, thou deceitful and wicked slave, if thou dost not immediately reveal where thou hast hidden the treasure that was in these sacks yesterday." Then Hasan replied, "O my master, I know not how this hath taken place. I am ignorant of what hath become of the treasure." But they would not believe him, and were exasperated beyond measure, because the treasure was gone. So they took up Hasan and threw him into the sea, and he sank out of their sight in the clear water, and they left the bags under the rock and departed on their journey. Now Hasan, at the first, when he was thrown into the sea, was stunned, and his mind was confused with fear. But after a while he found to his great joy and extreme wonder that he could live in the water as well as on the land. And he went down to the bottom of the sea, and it was as a lovely garden. The corals and the sea plants, amongst which the shining little fishes swam or rested, were beautiful to his sight, and the coolness of the water was refreshing to his heated limbs. And he said, "Praised be Allah, who hath bestowed on me this wonderful ring, for it is no doubt by its power that I have been preserved, and that I can live at the bottom of the sea. I will sit a while on this ledge of rock that looks like a couch, with a carpet of Ispahan spread over it. For this sea moss is beautiful as embroidered work from the looms of Iran, and I will watch the strange creatures of the sea as they swim about me." So he sat down on the rock, and the water was like a vault of emerald above him, and he saw the oysters opening and shutting their shells, and he saw the pearls glistening within them, and he watched the sea hedgehogs moving about, and he gathered shells of great beauty, such he had never found on the shore, whose colours were like the colours of the rainbow, in which one colour mingles with another. And Hasan said to himself, "This place is lovely as the gardens of Damascus, of which my father hath told me." Then he found a large shell that resembled a trumpet, and he put it to his mouth and blew into it, and it produced a sound like that of a silver trumpet, and he amused himself with blowing into it. But after he had amused himself so for some time, he heard a similar sound proceeding from a distance, and the sound came nearer and nearer, and he beheld a troop of creatures coming towards him. Their faces were beautiful as the moon, and their eyes lovely as the eyes of the gazelles in the desert, and their arms were fair as alabaster, but from their waist they resembled fishes. Now they were the sons and daughters of the old merman who lived in the cavern underneath the rock on which Hasan was sitting. They had heard the sound of the trumpet shell that he had been playing upon, and had come up to see who it was that had taken one of their instruments of music. "It may be," Hasan heard them say as they came on, "one of our cousins from Iran, who hath brought us the large pearls that our uncle promised us so long ago. Or perchance it is a messenger from the Sea King to inquire after the health of our father, for he is now the oldest and most venerated of all the sons of the sea." But when they saw Hasan, they were overcome with astonishment and wonder, and were silent from amazement. After a while they recovered from their great surprise, and swam close up to him, and one of them said, "This is one of the strange creatures who live on the land, to whom Allah hath not granted a tail, but who move about on two pegs." And they began to laugh immoderately, and they said, "Let us take the tailless creature to our father. It will amuse him greatly to see him." Then one of them said to Hasan, "Canst thou speak, O thou tailless creature, or art thou dumb like the fishes? What is thy name?" Then Hasan said, "I am called Hasan the Little, and the name of my father is Hasan al-Alfi, the camel driver. And because of a charm I have about me, I can live in the water, and I will go with you, for though you are but sea monsters, and I am of the superior race of men, I think you are kind in heart and will not hurt me." Then they said, "No, we will not hurt thee." But they laughed excessively when they heard him call them sea monsters, and said, "This poor creature from the land hath not much intelligence, for he thinketh he is greater and wiser than the mermen, who have tails covered with shining scales of gold and green and azure. But Allah hath not granted to all creatures the same amount of sense, so we will have pity on him." When they saw Hasan stand on his 2 legs, they laughed again, and said, "Do all the creatures on the land move as thou doest, on 2 pegs?" And Hasan answered, "No, some of them go on 4. And they laughed again, more immoderately, and said, "Certainly, the old man of the sea, who composeth the songs and the histories, never imagined any creatures so strange as these, of whom this mortal speaketh. And he hath lived for 1,000 years, and is the most learned of all the children of the sea. We think in this matter thou tellest not the truth, O Hasan the Little. But now we will go to our father, the old man of the sea." Then Hasan floated with them through the clear water till they came to a cavern, and they swam into it. And Hasan was oppressed and bewildered with the extreme beauty of the place when he examined it. There were on each hand 1,000 pillars of emerald that supported the roof, that was inlaid with the scales of gold and silver fishes curiously wrought together, and between each pillar was suspended a globe of pure white crystal, filled with the phosphorescence of the sea, which gave light to the hall of the 1,000 pillars. The floor was of pale pink coral, of the most delicate colour, and the divan was formed of mother of pearl, and on it reclined at the upper end of the hall the wise old man of the sea. Then the mermen and mermaidens brought Hasan to him, and said, "O our father, we have found this strange creature of the land, and have brought him that thou mayest amuse thyself with him, and he shall tell us his history, though he is not beautiful to behold, and seemeth to lack intelligence." Then the old merman regarded Hasan and said, "Tell us thy story, and after I have heard thee speak, I can judge of thy sense." And Hasan told them all his history. He disguised nothing, and when he had finished, the old merman said, "I am the oldest son of the sea, yet I cannot decide whether the things thou tellest, O son of the land, are truth or falsehood. I will consider the matter for a whole moon, and thou shalt dwell here with my sons and my daughters, and no one shall say that thou art a liar, or shall mock thee." And his children were abashed before him, for they knew he was wise, with the wisdom of many years, and they were very young. Yet had they given an opinion immediately they had seen Hasan, that he was a creature of little sense, and spoke falsehoods. But their father had decided he must consider the subject for 1 whole moon, and they said one to another, "We will not laugh any more at the tailless creature, but will call him Hasan, as he saith that is his name." So they were kind to him, and his heart was at peace, and they showed him every day some new plant or new creature of the sea, and he was every day more astonished at the wonderful things he saw. And when a moon was nearly past, Hasan said to one of the maidens of the sea, who was the most loved of them all, "I wonder not, O dear maiden of the sea, that thy brothers believed in their hearts that I spoke falsehoods when I told them of the strange creatures of the land. For if any one had informed me when I dwelt by the wells of Musa of the strange things that I see here day by day, I should have said that they spoke not the truth. I perceive that it becometh the young and the ignorant to be silent and to learn." Now at the end of a full moon, the old merman of the Hall of the 1,000 Pillars sent for Hasan and said to him, "O son of the land, I have pondered over thy words, and have observed thy deeds for 1 whole moon, and I am convinced that thou speakest the truth. So dwell with us as long as thou art content to do so, and tell us of the strange adventures that have come to thy knowledge
respecting the children of the land."
So Hasan was glad that his words were believed, and he told them of his home by the wells of Musa, and of the beautiful things he had heard described by his friends who had visited strange countries. And when he had finished, some of the children of the sea sighed and said,
"It were better to live on the land than in the sea."
But the old wise man said,
"Allah, whose name be praised, hath appointed to all creatures the lot that is best for them, and a change will come for you, O you children of the sea."
Then the sea maiden, who was the best beloved, said, "Yes, O my father, we shall assuredly go to the Isle of the Sweet Fountains when the time that Allah hath appointed shall come." Now it came to pass that in 7 days the dear maiden of the sea, who was the most beloved, died, and they all lamented for her bitterly. And Hasan also, though he was not of their race nor of their kindred, wept for the loss of the maiden of the pure and loving heart. And the Hall of the 1,000 Pillars became sad to him, and he wandered from it until he lost all means of finding his way back again, and he floated into the deep ocean and sank deeper and deeper into its silent and measureless abysses. And he became afraid as he went downward and downward into its silent depths. For as he descended lower and lower, all the beautiful things he had seen in the Hall of the Merman disappeared, and the silence and the solitude became insupportable to Hasan, and his heart became as a stone within him as he sank deeper and deeper, and he said, "Perchance it is ordained that I am to live for ever amid these silent waters. Oh, would that I had died like the dear maiden of the sea!" But his lamenting was of no avail, for he sank yet deeper and deeper, till at last his feet rested on a vast mountain that rose from the bottom of the nethermost ocean. And he was glad even of that change, though the mountain was full of deep pits and horrible caverns, and he would have rejoiced at the sight of the smallest fish, or of a piece of seaweed clinging to the rocks, but there was no living thing to be seen. But he said, "Perchance in that immense cavern that I see in the side of the mountain there may dwell some kind creatures of the race of the merman, who will direct me how to find my way to the land, for I wish now to return to my father's house." So he descended and looked into the cavern, and he could not move from the spot, but stood like one entranced, and his eyes were dilated with astonishment and wonder and fear. He saw that the cavern was of great extent, and was supported on pillars of adamant, and the floor and the roof were of marble, black as the night sky when no stars shine in it. To each pillar was a ring and an iron chain. At the further end of the cave was a door of open iron, curiously wrought with figures of a serpent, with a crown of gold and of carbuncles on his head. And through the open work of the door he saw another cave, more wonderful than the first. For in the middle was a fountain of fire, and the flames kept shooting upward and then falling down again like streams of liquid amber. And by the light of the fire fountain Hasan saw, reclining on a divan of black stone, the great sea serpent king. And he knew who he was, because the wise old man of the sea had spoken of him, but always with abhorrence, because he did evil to the mermen and enchanted them, and they avoided him and feared him greatly. Hasan could not see his great length, for he was coiled round and round till he formed as many circles as sailors make of 1,000 fathoms of cordage. But he saw that he had on his head a great crown of gold, and had round his neck a collar of carbuncles the size of ostrich eggs, and they glimmered and shone in the light of the fountain of fire. When Hasan had observed all these things, he said, "This is a vile place, and this is an evil-disposed creature. I will not tarry any longer near him, though I perceive that he is asleep now. But if he wakes, he may entrance me and turn me into a pillar of adamant. For now I see that all the pillars in this cave are in the likeness of living things of the sea or of the land, and doubtless by his magic he hath entranced them." So Hasan turned and fled quickly. Now as he was passing out, he saw that there were two strange sea monsters, chained by their necks to the two pillars nearest the entrance. And as he looked on them, he saw that they were weeping, and they opened their mouths, as if they would fain speak to him, but they could not utter a sound. But they continued to gaze at him with eyes full of tears. Now Hasan was compassionate, and he said, "Who are ye?" But they only looked the more sorrowfully and beseechingly at him, but could not utter a word. Then Hasan perceived that they were dumb, but that they were not without intelligence, and he said, "I will at the least unchain them, and perchance they will find, by the mercy of Allah, some way out of their enchantment." So he went to the one on the right hand and undid his chain, and while he did so he touched the strange creature with his ring. And lo, it was changed immediately into a young merman. Then Hasan was glad, and unfastened the one on the left hand, and touched it also with his ring. And lo, it became a beautiful maiden of the sea, and they said, "O beneficent one, let us hasten away from this abominable cave. Praised be Allah, who hath had pity on us and sent thee to deliver us, for we have been enchanted for many years, and hope of deliverance had died in our hearts." So they and Hasan went out of the cave and began to float upward through the waters. But they grew weary and decided to rest. So they reposed on a ledge of the great mountain, at the foot of which was the Hall of Adamant. And while they reclined on the rock, Hasan said, "Tell me your adventure, O ye children of the sea, and by what misfortune ye became enchanted." And they replied to him, "O good creature of the land, we are of the children of the sea who dwell in the Gulf of Oran, and our home is in the Palace of Pearl, for it is built of mother of pearl that glistens in the clear waters with the colours of the rainbow, and it is surrounded by a grove of pink coral, beautiful to behold. Now it happened by the disposal of Allah, whose name be praised, that our father said, 'Take these pearls to our cousins, the children of the old man of the sea, who dwelleth in the Hall of the 1,000 Pillars.'" Then Hasan interrupted them and said, "My heart is glad, and I rejoice greatly that I have delivered you from your enchantment in the Hall of the Serpent King, for you are the relations of those whom I respect greatly, and with whom I have dwelt more than one whole moon. But proceed with your adventures, for I would fain hear them to the conclusion." "O benevolent stranger," they said, "we took the pearls from our father, and we replied, 'O father, to hear is to obey.' But when we had left him and were swimming on to the Hall of the 1,000 Pillars, we said to each other, 'What use is it to go directly to the old man of the sea? Let us amuse ourselves by going downwards to see what things and creatures are in the abysses of the great ocean, for doubtless they are many and wonderful to behold.' But alas, after a time we lost all power over our motions, and were drawn down rapidly with great force till we reached the Hall of Adamant, and were drawn by enchantment into it, and up to the place where reclined the Serpent King of the sea. And he hissed at us and said, 'O disobedient children of the sea, ye are in my power now, and I will enchant you, and ye shall lose all that is beautiful about you, and become monsters.' Then we feared greatly and wept, but he only laughed and hissed at us, and he looked at us with his red fiery eyes. We felt ourselves changed into the ugly creatures thou sawest, O good stranger, and then he chained us to the pillars at the entrance of the cave, and the power of speech was taken from us. We could only weep and lament our fate in our hearts, for it was not in the power of the evil Serpent King to change our minds. And though we could not utter words, we could pray to Allah in our thoughts, and entreat him to have compassion on us. But our hearts grew every moon more sorrowful, and we despaired of deliverance, when thou camest and released us. O beneficent stranger, wilt thou tell us thy name, that we may retain it for ever in our memories, and inscribe it on the most honourable place of the Palace of Pearl? And he said, My name is Hasan the Little, the son of Hasan el-Alfi, the camel-driver of the wells of Musa. And they replied to him, During the whole of our existence we will not forget thee, O Hasan, for the ungrateful are an abomination to Allah. Then they proceeded upwards, and at last the children of the sea uttered a cry of joy and said, We know that we are not far from our home, for these rocks are familiar to us. And they parted from Hasan with many kind words and thanks, and he continued his way towards the shores of Arabia. It was at the time of sunset when he came to the top of the sea, and he saw at a little distance from him an island beautiful as the gardens of paradise. At first he thought it was only the reflection of the gold and purple and rose colours of the sky which made the appearance of a glorious island of light in the clear waters of the sea, but as he considered it with attention, he became convinced that it was the island of the sweet fountains that the dear maiden of the sea loved to converse about. And he said, I will go and examine more nearly the island of beauty and loveliness that Allah hath placed in the sea. And he drew near and landed in a garden where all the flowers of the world were blooming, and where the sound of fountains that fell into marble basins curiously carved, and the murmuring of running streams were heard perpetually. And Hasan's heart was dilated with joy at the sight of the garden, and he said, I will repose here one night before I proceed to my father's house. I am astonished that I never heard from any of the dwellers by the wells of Musa of this beautiful island, for it seemeth to me very nigh to the land of the sons of Ishmael. And it was even so, but to the generality of persons it only appeared as the colours of the sunset, and they passed it by with indifference. So Hasan wandered about the garden, and drank from the fountains, and lay down to sleep. And when he awoke from a sweet and refreshing slumber, the full moon was shining, and he looked up, and lo, beside him stood a beautiful creature of the children of the genii. Her eyes were like the eyes of the gazelle of the desert, and her form was like the palm tree in its beauty and grace. And Hasan arose and bowed with his face to the ground and made obeisance, for he was overwhelmed with astonishment and wonder and reverence. Then he heard a voice, sweet as the wind of the south through the curves of a seashell, that said, Hasan, son of Hasan el-Alfi, dost thou not know me? And he gazed on the beautiful genie, and he knew in his heart that it was the dear maiden of the sea, whom he had loved so much when he lived in the Hall of the 1,000 Pillars. Now she was changed into wondrous beauty and loveliness, but it was only the change from the seed to the full-grown flower. So Hasan knew her to be the same dear maiden who had been so kind to him before she was changed, and became one of the genii of the island of sweet fountains. And his heart was filled with joy that found no words to express itself. So he only gazed at her with pleasure in his eyes, and with his hands clasped in reverence, for he felt he was in the presence of a being greatly superior to himself, and he remembered with shame how often he had despised the discourse he had heard from her of the things that would be in the island of the sweet fountains, to which she always said she should go after her life as a maiden of the sea had finished, for the words had seemed to him but as fables. Now he bowed before her and was silent. Then she smiled on him and said softly, I know what thou hast done for the disobedient children of the sea, whom thou hast released from a long enchantment. The blessing of Allah, whose name be praised, be on thee, Hasan. And now thou must return to thy father's house, and perform all the duties that pertain to thy station, as the son of the good camel-driver Hasan al-Alfi, whose misfortunes have been many and grievous. And when thy task is completed, thou wilt see me again." Then Hasan found words to speak, and said, "O beautiful daughter of the Genie, cannot I benefit thee in some measure? Can I not go to the Hall of the 1,000 Pillars, and bring thee tokens of the welfare of thy father, and of those whom thou lovest?" Then replied the lovely child of the Genie, with a smile that made the heart happy, as a ray of sunshine maketh gladsome a dark cavern, "It is good that thou hast thought of this, O Hasan, but I need it not. Every day I see them, and know of their welfare. For when the last ray of the sun toucheth the sea, I go down upon it and visit my kindred. They are not aware of my presence, for so Allah hath decreed, except that they feel in their hearts an ineffable calm, for which they can assign no reason. And I shall watch over them till the time that is fixed shall come, and they too shall join me in the island of the sweet fountains, and the time will not be long." When she ceased speaking, Hasan felt a wonderful drowsiness come over him, and he fell into a deep sleep. How long he slept he never could discover, but when he awoke it was noonday, and he was laid under the rocks where the robbers had examined the sacks and found them full of stones and sand, and where they had determined to throw Hasan into the sea. And now when he had opened his eyes, behold, he saw the 2 sacks beside him, and he was overwhelmed with astonishment, and said, "The beautiful child of the Genie hath conveyed me hither during the night. Now I will return immediately, as she desired me to do, unto the wells of Musa, and serve and comfort my father." And he prepared to depart, when lo! he saw before him the aged pilgrim who had given him the ring and the bags. So he bowed to the ground and said, "I have nothing to offer thee, holy dervish, not even a cup of water, for my adventures have been strange since I entertained thee at my father's house, and I am straitened in my heart because I have not fulfilled the trust thou gavest to me. Here are the bags committed to my keeping, but they are filled with sand and pebbles." Then the old man touched the bags with his staff and said, "Open the bags, O Hasan the Little, and let us see the change that has befallen the treasure." So Hasan opened them, and they were filled with gold and diamonds and rubies and emeralds as before, and he was silent with wonder and joy. Then he said, "I restore to thee, O holy pilgrim, that thou leftest with me, and I thank thee above all for this wonderful talisman that thou gavest me, which has been the means of teaching me many things I should not have discovered without it." Then the dervish said, "I give thee the sacks of treasure, but thou must give me the ring, for I need it to give to others of thy age who require to be taught as thou hast been." So Hasan took the copper ring from his finger and gave it to the dervish, and he blessed him and departed, and Hasan saw him no more. Then Hasan took a few pieces of gold from one of the sacks and put them in his sash, and he hid the bags of treasure in a hole in the rocks, and departed to the house of his father. And the way was toilsome over the hot sand of the desert, and when he arrived he found no one there, and the garden was overrun with weeds, and the channels for the water round the garden of herbs was dry, for no one had replenished them from the well since he had been taken away by the robbers. And the fence was broken down, and the ripe dates were dropping from the trees, for there was no one to gather them. The only thing that remained unchanged was the great well, for the water still bubbled up in it and ran over the side of the basin into a little canal it had made for itself. And along the side of this channel the flowers and the trees were green and beautiful. So Hasan drank of the water, and did eat of the fruit, and was refreshed, and lay down to rest in the garden house. Now Hasan arose as soon as it was day, and began to draw water and pour it into the channels to refresh the trees and the herbs. And while he was at work, a family came by of poor Arabs who had been robbed of all they possessed by the Bedouins of the desert, and the father and his 3 sons asked charity of Hasan in the name of Allah, and he gave them some more dates to eat, and gave them water from the well. And then he said, "Be content to abide here and to assist me to restore the garden to its former state of usefulness and beauty, and I will pay you with liberality for your work, for I am desirous to have it in order before the return of my father, who hath long been absent. And I too, though I am so young, have had strange adventures, and have been far away from this place where I was born. Perchance some day, if ye consent to dwell with me, I may tell you of the wonderful events that have occurred to me." Then the men rejoiced and said, "We will stay and work for thee, O master, and thou shalt pay us for our labour." Then the work of restoring all things to perfection proceeded rapidly, and after a while Hasan went to the place where he had hid the sacks, and took out more gold, and bought camels and sheep, and carpets to cover the divans, and made all ready to receive his father and his brothers. But they came not, neither had he any tidings of them, and he went out and sat down in the desert and wept and said, "Alas, my father! Alas, my brothers!" And as he sat and lamented, there came to him a poor man whose robe was torn and tattered, and whose face betokened hunger and sickness. But he no sooner saw Hasan than he cried out, "Oh, Hasan, my son!" And he embraced him, and they wept for joy, for it was Hasan al-Alfi, the father of Hasan the Little. Then he reverently led his father home, and brought him water to wash, and took off his soiled robe, and put on him one of silk, and made him recline on the divan. And the servants came and served him with food and sherbet. When he was refreshed, Hasan inquired respecting the welfare of his brothers, and his father answered, "Alas, my son, we have been robbed of all we possessed, and thy brothers were compelled to hire themselves as servants to a rich merchant of Baghdad. But I was too old to work, so they gave me some water and food for my journey, and I have with great toil and labour travelled home, and I am greatly astonished at all the abundance and beauty that I see around me, and I know not from whence it hath come." Then Hasan the younger told his father of all his strange adventures, and the night was far advanced before he had narrated them all. Then they praised Allah and lay down to sleep. On the morrow Hasan sent 2 of the servants with camels and gold and jewels to Baghdad for his brothers, that they might be relieved from their servitude. And at the end of 2 moons they returned, and there was rejoicing in the house of Hasan al-Alfi, such as had not been remembered by any man that dwelt by the wells of Musa.